Hi everyone, welcome to the latest lesson on JavaScript. So today what we're going to be learning about is document object properties. So what they are is basically they are the properties of objects on pages, and so you can use JavaScript to actually control whether items appear, where they are on the page, and you can actually insert items onto your page. So it's a very useful um, it's a very useful command. So to give you an example where it would be useful is if, for example, you're doing a to-do list and you have normally if you had a to-do list you would put in some a p tag and you'd have task number one, and then you'd add another p tag for task number two and three. But the problem is you don't know how many p tasks or how many tasks you actually have, therefore you don't know how many p tags to actually add. And then obviously if you want it to show on the screen, you need to be able to assign those values. So this is all of what a document object properties will do for you. Okay, so let's just get into it. Okay, so to do this, to access these properties, what we need to do is put in document, and basically what document refers to is um, the file itself, so the overall web page. And then what we need to do is target a specific area. So I'm going to put something in the body. And you might have noticed too that I have put the script outside of the body, and the reason for that is because of what I'm about to do. Which will affect that. So to be able to write something into the HTML, we need inner HTML, which is a property of or a method of document. And then we can insert some text. So I'm just going to put in some text, and if I save that, what happens is that it gets into the the page, even though there are no HTML areas anywhere in here that have text. So the only place this is coming from is from the JavaScript. Now you can also use it to control other properties on other areas of the web page. So for example, if you want to have the title change, you can put in document title, for example, and you might have the name there changed to say new page. Okay, and we better put the semicolons at the end of the thing too. And we can save that. And as soon as we save that and we have a look over here, you'll see that we've now got new page instead of document there. So you can change those values. But there are some issues associated with targeting these components. So let me give you an example, show you an example. So if, for example, we have body and has an actual tag in there. So for example, it has a H1 tag with title, or say main title. Okay. Now, if we save that now, what happens is if we go back here, it doesn't seem to do anything. Now, the reason for that is because this command here is overwriting everything that is within the body tag and saying now we're going to put in text. So if I was to turn that into a comment temporarily and save it again, what you'll see is up comes the main H1 title, but that's being overridden by this command here. So the problem is that we need to be able to target specific elements in different ways. So the way that we can do that is using a second command, which is called query selector. And so what that does is it allows us to actually target something. So if we want to target the H1, which is the only thing in there at the moment, it tells us, right, we're interested in doing something to that particular HTML tag. And so then we can apply the same process as what we did before with the inner HTML. And let's say we decide that we want to give it a new name, like instead of main title, biggest title, and we want to put that at the end. Now, if we put this in place and save it, you'll see that nothing's changed. Now, the reason nothing's changed is because the code is getting executed in the order that it appears. So the first thing that happens is that the text gets the H1 gets overridden by the text, um, and so there's no H1 in order to be able to select it. So if we do that, get rid of that, and reapply it, then we get a name change. So we've been able to target specifically that element. Now, if we put a second element, like let's say in this case a secondary title, a H2, so second title, what you'll see is that because we've targeted that change only to that element, it leaves everything else on the page alone, which is what we want. And so that's how you can select an item. Now, if you want to select by class and be even more specific, so that might be in cases where you might have H2 appearing in multiple places on the page, for example, and we want to target that class, we can do that by second title. So we're going to give it a class. I'll just call it second for the moment. Okay, and once we've given it that class, now we target these things in exactly the same way as what we do with CSS. So if it's a class, we just need to put a dot in front of it, and you'll see that now we'll end up with main title and then biggest title below, because it's now targeting this element rather than the H1 element as it was before. If we save that now, what we can see is that that's exactly what has happened. So that's how you can target specific elements. Now, the other thing that you can do is that you don't have to just put text in. You can actually add HTML elements. So I'm going to show you an example of how we're going to do that. So instead of text, what we can do is we can type in, let's say we want to put a couple of buttons in. We can put button, let's say button 1, we might put an OK button in, and we'll need to type in exactly as we would type into HTML. And if we click save, okay, and go back to our element, you'll see that it's been overwritten. We've created a button on there. So you can actually use this to create elements. And if you wanted to create a second one, so let's say we wanted a cancel button as well, we can do that as well. Click save and then go back to our thing. Now we've created two buttons. So you can obviously keep going and add whatever HTML elements that are there. You can also add classes to them. So if you had specific styling that you wanted to appear, that you wanted to apply, you could also do that as well. So pretty much that's how you add it. But one of the problems is that it's the same problem we had before, which is that we've got these elements that we perhaps want to keep on the page. We don't want to override it with everything. So how do we deal with that? And how we deal with that is just a very slight amount of forward planning. So if we wanted to create a class, we wanted to add some buttons, but we didn't want to affect these particular elements, what we need to do is leave a container within the body that is ready, waiting to accept these new commands. So in this case, I'm going to create a div, which is a little container. It doesn't affect, if you had a blank div, it would not affect the appearance at all of the sheet, but it's sitting there ready to go. And all we need to do, if we wanted to create those buttons while maintaining the H1 and H2, we just need to target it. So if we target it, we would target it in the same way as what we did before, which would be a query selector. And with the query selector, we would need to target a div because we haven't given it a class yet. And then, of course, what we need to do is we need to write an inner HTML to send this information into that div, which we can now do. And once we do that, we come back, and so we've ended up with two new buttons. We've kept everything that we want. And of course, you can put as many items in as you like into that div, or you can have extra divs. So if, for example, you wanted to keep it separate on different areas of your page, let's say different sections, you could have multiple div classes and then add in the information as required. Okay, so that's basically how elements work with respect to HTML elements. Now, the other thing that we want to teach you a little bit more about is how we can control events, other events as they happen, and trigger functions to run to do some of these changes. Now, to do this, what we're going to do is have a look at a few of what they call event listeners, of which we've already used one, the on-click event. So basically what these are is these are specific commands that will allow you to run a function based on an event occurring. So the first one being the obvious on click. So if you clicked on a picture, if you clicked on a button, you could apply this to and say equals to the name of a function. And once you had the name of the function, you could get it to run whatever code you want. Now we have other ones which are common. There's on key down, which basically just means if you press a key, on scroll for scrolling. So if you're scrolling, it might do an event. On mouse enter, so if you're hovering over, on mouse leave if you stop hovering. So there's a few different ones, and I'm sure there's other ones, but these are probably the most important ones. So what we're going to do is we're going to teach you how to grab a user input, and we're going to get those that triggered using an on key down event. Okay, so for example, okay, we'll get rid of what we've got here, and we'll start again. So we're going to put in an input box. So hopefully you remember that an input box can be in several different forms, and it's one of those HTML tags which doesn't have a closing tag as well. So the closing, so we just need the single tag. Now, if we want to set a specific type, we can. So you can set things like, equals. We can set things like text, which is a text, which is a text box. You can click check boxes, and there's lots of them, so you can just choose. So we're going to just set it for text at the moment. And so when we save it, if we look at what it's giving us on the screen, it's just giving us a box, and that box is basically where we are entering text. So we could add a label or whatever, but basically that's what we can do. And you can also, which I haven't shown you before, you can use things like placeholders. So placeholder, if we put enter text here, and we save it again, what that does is puts a enter text here, so it prompts the user. So that's one I don't think we went through on the CSS, but it's there anyway. Okay, so the other thing we want to do is that we want to get the information back from what's in the text box. And so what we want to do, and we want to get that on using an on, I think it's on key, is it? On key down event. Okay, and we're going to do this with an enter key. Okay, so let's call enter key, call our function, and so now we can create our function. Okay, so we're basically assigned the function. So if we then do that, and we'll just check that everything's working the way we should have, enter key, okay, and oh, we have forgotten to put those brackets in. If we have our enter key, and we can just see how it's working. So if I put in console dot key, sorry, not key, log into it, and what I'm going to, and then I might just put in, we'll put in tests. So each time the button clicks, with any sort of luck, it will hopefully produce the name text on the screen. So if we open up our inspect page and have a look, each time we hit a key, you'll see I hit A and it produced test, and then test again. So you'll see there's two of them in a row, 3, 4 each time I hit a key. So that's working. So that's good. So the next thing we want to do is we want to actually make sure that we are selecting the actual input box properly. so that we can get the actual input from the user that the user is sending through. So the way that we can do this is that instead of doing that, I'm going to create a variable, and I might call that input. Does that make sense? And then what I'm going to put in is document dot query selector. So we have our query selector, and then we need to target what we're interested in. Okay, so, and in this case it is the input button. So I'm just going to put, because there's only one of them on the page. If there was more of them, I would put in I might put in a class for it as well. Okay, so we now have that document. Now, what we'll get it to do now is that now that we've created this input value, it also has in itself a few methods that we can add. So input dot, and we can put in the attribute, which is a value. So we can get the value. So basically what we're doing is identifying the input, and then we're saying what is the value of that input, i.e. what is the value in the box. So I'm going to put that as we're going to show that on the screen. So we'll do that as a console.log. Okay, and then we have our input value. So that means that theoretically with what we're going, hopefully it all works, is each time we hit a key, it's going to give us the value that is in the box. Okay, so if we do that now, oh, I didn't save that, so I'll save it first, and hopefully, let's go back to our little thing. Okay, so we push A, okay, and you can see we're getting the values of the box each and every time that it's clicked. Okay, so that's working as expected. Now, what we want to do though is we don't want to collect it every single time that a key's hit. What we actually want to do is allow the user to put the information in and then hit the enter key. So we need a way of identifying the actual keys that are being pushed. So we're going to use a different command, which is called event key. So what this will return is it will return the value of the keystroke that's being entered. So for example, we do this again, and I put in A, it returns the value A, but if I put in enter, it returns the value enter. So I can enter A, S, D, enter again, and space, it just leaves a blank. Tab, so if I hit the tab button, so you can see that's what it returns. So what we need to do is if we want to collect this information only when the enter button is clicked, that's where we can apply our if statement skills to. Okay, so this time what we want to do is that we want to say, well, if we have our condition, then we go off and we do something. Okay, so what I want to check first is that our if statement is working as we might expect. I'll just put, okay, so tab that so it makes sense, a bit more sense. So it's always a good idea to tab your thing so you can read what's going on a little bit more easy. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to put in event key, and we know that it's returning the value of the key and giving. So in the case of the enter button, if we put in enter, now it was case sensitive, so I'm not sure it will make any difference, but capital E, and that was with the enter, that's what it's returning. So hopefully when we return the values, we'll click save now, only when we push enter will it actually give us the result enter on the screen. So if I put and it's not working. Okay, so it's still returning a value every single time that the value is added. Now the reason for that, I think, is because I just put equal rather than the proper equal sign like that. Because remember that for something to be equal, it needs to be 3 equal buttons. So hopefully that's what's the problem. Let's try again. So nothing's happening. Then enter, enter. So that's returning, that's doing what we want. Okay, so now the last thing we want to do is if we want to get that information into a variable, now I'm not going to bother in this case, but what we'll do is we'll print the out, we'll collect the output. So what we want is we want the input value, okay, and we want that input value to appear on the screen. Now, obviously, if we get that correct, then we could just assign it to a variable. Okay, and we want to collect that only when we've hit the enter key. So the user has entered everything that they want. So I'm going to enter hello, and when I hit enter, it's collecting that information. So that's one way to collect functions. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to cover off very, very quickly is that so far we've been talking about HTML only, but you can also alter CSS items as well. So, for example, and I'm not going to bother doing on the screen now, but if you do document and we put in style, okay, we can then put in a particular aspect that we want. So, for example, if we put in display and then we make that equal none, we can actually hide the document. Now, with the display, you can see that that's the basic structure, but if we wanted to target a specific element, such as input, we would need to query select, and then we would have to select the input, for example, if we wanted to do that. Okay, so if we do that now, that would make the item disappear off the screen and you can see it's gone. Okay, so that display element, you might remember from CSS, we use that for grids and for flex boxes and all that sort of stuff. So if we display it as disappeared, that means that we can make it reappear when we feel like it. Okay, so if, for example, we wanted to change that and associate it with a button, with a function, you'd be able to get that to reappear. Now, obviously, we can apply the same things in any number of styles. So we could make the borders bigger, we could change the color, we could do all sorts of things. And that's how you can change style elements, CSS elements within a spreadsheet. So hopefully that makes sense. Have a crack at the exercises and we'll see you in the next lesson. Cheers.